Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum, and we're here every Sunday evening from 8 till 10 p.m. Eastern Time, looking at life through a biblical lens, solving all the world's problems in 2 hours or less. I wanted to talk to you this week about what the Constitution really says about race and slavery. I'm talking about the Constitution of these United States. And I want you to understand this under the broader heading of pesky thing education. 150 years ago, last month, December 2015, the 13th Amendment officially was ratified. And with it, slavery finally abolished in America. The New York World hailed it as, quote, one of the most important reforms ever accomplished by voluntary human agency, end of quote. The newspaper said the amendment, quote, takes out of politics and consigns to history an institution incongruous with our political system, inconsistent with justice, and repugnant to the humane sentiments fostered by Christian civilization. End of quote. With the passage of the 13th Amendment, which states, quote, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. With that statement, the central contradiction at the heart of the founding fathers' founding documents was resolved. 89 years after the Declaration of Independence had proclaimed all men to be free and equal, race-based chattel slavery would be no more in the United States. Every sane, decent, honorable, respectable American agrees wholeheartedly. However, most of us do not recognize that the Declaration and Constitution at no time established, condoned, or endorsed slavery. Pesky thing, education. And you would not know this by the current debate. Today, activists confuse a U.S. Supreme Court decision with the Constitution. They're talking about the Dred Scott case in 1857. And here the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court made a statement that was merely his opinion and not law. He said that the Founders' Constitution regarded blacks as, quote, so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit, end of quote. That was not law. That was not Constitution. That was not even reality in most places. It was just his comment. The argument that the Constitution is racist suffers from a fatal flaw. The concept of race does not exist in the Constitution. For example, nowhere in the Constitution or in the Declaration of Independence, which is the preamble to the Constitution, are human beings classified according to race, or skin color, or ethnicity, nor, one would add, sex, religion, or any other of the left's favorite groupings. Our founding principles are colorblind, deliberately. Our history, regrettably, has not been. The Constitution speaks of people, citizens, persons, other persons, a euphemism for slaves, and Indians not taxed, in which case it is their tax-exempt status and not their skin color that matters. The first references to race and to color occur in the 15th Amendment's guarantee to the right to vote, ratified in 1870. The infamous 3/5 clause, which more nonsense has been written than any other clause, does not declare that a black person is worth 60% of a white person. That's political hay. It seems that for purposes of determining the number of representatives for each state in the House, and in consequence directing taxes, the government would only count 3/5 of the slaves and not all of them, as the southern states, who wanted to gain more seats, had insisted. The 60,000 or so free blacks in the North and in the South were counted on a par with whites. Contrary to a popular misconception, the Constitution also does not say that only white males who own property could vote. The Constitution defers to the states to determine who shall be eligible to vote. They do this under Article 1, Section 2, Clause 1. And it's a little known fact of American history that black citizens were voting in perhaps as many as 10 states at the time of the founding. The precise number is not clear, but only Georgia, South Carolina, and Virginia explicitly restricted suffrage to whites. The infamous 3/5 clause, which more nonsense has been written than any other clause, does not declare that a black person is worth 60% of the white person. The Constitution does not explicitly recognize slavery and does not therefore admit that slaves were property. All the protection it affords to persons could be applied to slaves. Douglas concluded, quote, "Any one of these provisions in the hands of abolition statesmen and backed up by a right moral sentiment would put an end to slavery in America." End of quote. Although it largely mimics the Constitution, the Confederate Constitution of 1861 is the one that references the institution of Negro slavery, Negroes of the African race, and Negro slaves. It, the Confederate Constitution, specifically forbids the Confederate Congress from passing any law denying or impairing the right of property in Negro slaves. The U.S. Constitution, 1787, failed to abolish slavery. It purposed to do it later because it was such an inflammatory issue. There were representatives to this Constitutional Convention that would not vote in favor of the Constitution because they didn't go far enough and didn't trust these men that succeeding generations would follow this lead. The Constitutional Convention was convened not to free the slaves, but to amend the Articles of Confederation. The slave-holding states would have never consented to a new constitution that struck a blow at their particular institution. The fact that it did not follow through subsequent Congresses is sad. But that is not an indictment of the Constitution itself. As Frederick Douglass explained, a black man, quote, "A chart is one thing. The course of a vessel is another. The Constitution may be right. The government wrong." End of quote. In no way can the Constitution be said to advocate a pro-slavery position. The principles of natural right undergirding it are resolutely anti-slavery. Its language conveys disapproval of slavery, and it contains within it several provisions that could have been and were at times used to prevent the spread of slavery. Now, this may not make it an anti-slavery constitution, but even before the 13th Amendment, it was a constitution that, if placed in the right hands, could be made to serve the cause of freedom. As I said in the outset, pesky thing, education. We're getting our education from our news outlets, from people who are making speeches, from some of our educators who ought to know better. Men and women alike who 200+ years later do not understand the basic rules of language. Under our course at the Bible Institute of Charleston, our first course is called Bibliology. It is the doctrine of the Bible. And we talk initially about how we're going to interpret that book. And we interpret that book the way we interpret all written language. You look at the words. What are the definitions for these words? You look at the grammar, the syntax, the combination of all of these things to get the flow as to what the thought must be. You use ordinary definitions of the words, ordinary grammatical structures and understanding, and then you go back. You go back to the person who wrote it, and you begin to interpret those words and those phrases and those concepts in the context in which that person lived. We have lost a lot in terms of our English language. And there are words those old-timers used that we either have forgotten or use differently today. And the reality is, if you do not interpret it the way the author intended, using his context, you will never understand what was being said. And that's where we are. And opportunists and others are using all of this. They're using our ignorance. They now have 5 generations of Americans who have not gotten an education. Our so-called public schools haven't been public in my lifetime. They are now federal. They ceased being public. They became state, and now they're federal government schools. And they are watering things down and changing things around to make sure that everybody thinks that they're getting a superb education, but in the end, they're not learning anything. New math. Not learning penmanship. What kind of dumb is that? Can't sign your name. Well, we don't have to. We got electronic gizmos, and I've used them. There's an electronic signature, and you click the button or whatever that says that you'll agree to that, and then it's mortgage online. But my goodness, what are we losing instead? And so now we have an entire generation of people who are living in slavery to our federal government and to their masters. The Al Sharptons and the Jesse Jacksons and so many others. And they run in front of a camera out on the street and they say the most outlandish things, and most of the population of the country believes it. 6 months later, it proves out that it wasn't like that at all. But the soundbite remains. And we buy it because we're not educated. You love your children, Get them out of the federal school. Teach them. Teach them about God. Teach them about their country. Teach them how to read and write. Your grandchildren will thank you.